So John's going to begin with a few comments of Brian's own journey, and I'll supplement that. And we'll talk a little bit about the production of these projects, Universe Story and Journey of the Universe.
When we first made Journey of the Universe and the film was in a 2-hour form, there was the possibility of a showing on PBS. That did materialize, and for 3 years the film was on PBS. It happened that there was a need to redo some of the introduction. It did not make it into the final 55-minute version, but in that introduction, Brian reintroduced himself. He came into the camera in a region in Seattle, and he described himself as a mathematical cosmologist, and then he also indicated that his father was from Fraser River Salish people. And I think that's a dimension of Brian that many people are not quite aware of, namely his indigenous background. His grandmother was a fully traditional woman, so his father was a traditional participant in governance on the Fraser River Reservation of the Salish people that Brian comes from. On his mother's side, Caucasian white school teacher. His father also was a school teacher. And Brian then has, through his life, not leaned heavily on his indigenous background, but in this particular introduction, he revisited that because he felt it was an important perspective for a viewer to have a feeling for the worldview from which he was approaching the Journey of the Universe project. Brian then did his studies in mathematical cosmology at University of Portland, and he brought those studies eventually to a position. He was hired at the university, and he was teaching in a physics department or physics-related department. And the issues that developed for him there were graduate students, PhD students, who were accomplishing their degrees and were being wooed and hired by the military employment possibilities. Brian himself was not opposed to that possibility, but he found it increasingly frustrating that his best students would go off into military development or into the commercial world, where he found actually one of his best students was on a project to develop slippery sugar. It was these realizations that finally caused Brian to disengage from that academic career. He literally pulled the rug out from under his own feet, and he was married at the time, and his wife Denise was game and willing to pursue these possibilities. Brian, I'm talking about you.
Thanks, John. Technology wins the day. Great.
Brian, rather than my going on and on, I think I'd rather turn the floor over to you, and we can carry on in the conversation in that regard. Is that okay?
That sounds wonderful.
Good.
That sounds great. Here we go. So it'd be fun to see everybody. Is that a possibility? If that's not, that's okay.
With this version.
Our technicians can do.
Can I ask, for Brian's sake, can everyone please follow me in a ooh, ah? Can we give Brian a sense of who we are? Ooh.
Okay, great. Thanks, John. Thanks, everyone. So great to be here with you. And hi. I know, that's great. Thanks so much. Yeah, thank you. That's terrific. All right. I want to begin by saying what a privilege it is to be part of this event. It means so much to me. This great moment of when Thomas Berry's life is being captured in a book and then sent out into the world by John and Mary Evelyn. It's just such an important moment. I knew this would happen someday, and I look forward to this really for many years. So I'm thrilled this is happening. Good to be here with you. What I'd like to do for my part is to speak to you about the new story. the news story as Thomas Berry presented to me and others, and as well to speak about the effect this news story has had on me. I just want to say here at the beginning that Thomas's view was that this news story would have an immense impact on humanity over time. It was one of the great opportunities that we have before us to make changes that many of us are hoping for. So he saw in the news story a powerful promise. And so I want to talk about the news story in celebration of Thomas, but also to say that my own experiences, I think, are more or less typical. And they are just a little tiny slice of what that others are experiencing. And I think that actually by sharing with one another the impact of the news story on us, we actually accelerate the transformation that Thomas talked about, and which is also celebrated in this new biography, which is magnificent in its capture of the many gifts that Thomas gave us. So for me, especially coming from the world of cosmology, I like to give a sense of the steps that happened to arrive at what Thomas called the new story. There are different ways of referring to this, of course, and they're all important. I just prefer Thomas's because that's who taught me. But I can summarize the news story very simply using the words, the basic idea and concepts of Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, that the news story is the discovery of cosmic evolution, or more simply, the news story is the discovery of evolution. In another phrase that Thomas liked a lot, which I think helps, is that the news story is the movement from a cosmos to a cosmogenesis. So I wanted to begin with some remarks on how we can view this as having taken place very, very recently. Humans, Homo sapiens, as we all know, have been living and wandering around planet Earth for something like 200,000 years, perhaps 300,000 years. And we can imagine that all sorts of movement into a deeper understanding of where they were, that these movements took place throughout. But unfortunately, of course, we don't have written records. But what we have are stories that came very late, like 10 and 20,000 years ago, that they're around the planet. A number of cultures had a way of thinking about their place in the universe, which was that we lived on the land, and that if you went far enough out, you arrived at water or chaos. But the land was where we lived. It was the center of our world. And then overhead was this amazing bowl of stars. And the stars themselves were in movement every day. So that is, I like to think of this as the way in which being intelligent chimpanzee-like creatures, we were attempting to map out our place. And that's a great achievement, to think in terms of like a continent on which we live and then surrounded by these stars. And what happened in antiquity is that what was noticed was that some of the stars wandered. They wandered instead of just going around across the sky at night. They changed positions with each other, and this became known after Plato talked about it as the problem of the planets. Why would or the problem of the wandering stars? Why would some of the stars wander around? Why wouldn't they just go flying across the sky every night like all the others? And so this conundrum led to a new understanding, as you all know. Copernicus was not the first, he was not the only one, but he, in the Western tradition, he was the one that suggested a new hypothesis, namely that the stars actually weren't moving. It was the Earth that was spinning, that we were on a ball, and that we were flying around the center of the solar system, which was the sun. And so this massive change enabled us to enter a larger universe, a larger world, one where the Earth is in constant movement around the sun. This held for centuries. And then in 1920, Harlow Shapley discovered that, in fact, the sun is also moving. So the sun is moving around the gathering of stars we call the Milky Way galaxy. It moves around the Milky Way galaxy once every 250 million years. So it has made this journey 25 times over its lifetime so far. Now, only 8 years later, another discovery concerning movement came forth, 1928, 1929, and this was Edwin Hubble, who discovered that our entire Milky Way galaxy and all of the other galaxies are moving away from one another. And this is a movement now that encompasses a much vaster space. And then following upon this, in 1931, Georges Lemaitre came up with a theory. And his theory was that the reason all of the galaxies are expanding away from one another is that at the beginning of time, there was this vast explosion that sent everything about different directions. Einstein was not very impressed with this theory, so was, in a certain sense, pushed aside. But as the scientists kept examining, and then in 1964 in New Jersey, Penzias and Wilson established the scientific fact of Lemaitre's hypothesis. And so we came to this realization that the universe began with this explosion, and this is a different kind of movement, because now we realize it wasn't just that the Earth is going around the sun is going around the Milky Way. This is a different kind of movement. This is a movement of development. So that the universe began with simple elementary particles. And then it developed into atoms, stars, galaxies, then into planets, life. You see, so that that's the crucial difference between cosmos and cosmogenesis. So in the way Thomas would like to speak of this, he said we live in a developing universe. That's the great new story, right there in a phrase. We live in a universe that is developing on every level. And the way his favorite phrase for capturing this is to say that we live in a time developmental universe. That is the great gift, Thomas felt, of modern science. If we understand this new universe, it will lead to deep changes in how we organize ourselves as humans. So now I want to move and just to talk, briefly about a couple of experiences I had as I was attempting to take in this new story. And let me repeat that I don't think my experiences are in any way unique or special, or I think they're very common and obvious, really. It's kind of surprising it took me so long to get to them. But I was there with Thomas and John and Mary Evelyn, and all of us were attempting to take this in. And on one level, the scientific details they're readily accessible. I mean, once you get a sense of it, I mean, okay, the universe is expanding and things are moving this way, but somehow it's the change that Thomas was talking about is more than a conceptual change. It's not just how we think about the universe, it's actually to live this universe. And so that is my attempt here to say a couple things. So yeah, but here's the first one. So it involves a couple little things. I'll put it all together here. So what scientists learned is that the physical interactions taking place in the early universe have a surprising elegance to them. One way to say it is that the future, in certain ways, is there in those interactions. I mean, so let me give you an example of what I mean. The force that holds together the elementary particles at the nuclear level is called the strong nuclear interaction. And so this was at work in the first, because the protons and the protons were bonded together sometimes they'd break apart. The force that held them together is the strong nuclear interaction. We didn't even know it existed until the 20th century. And then once we discovered it, Ernst Rutherford and others, once we discovered it, we could measure it. That's what we're good at. And what we learned is that if that strength is altered even slightly, it leads to radical changes in the large-scale structure of the universe. One example is if the strong nuclear were made just 2% stronger, there wouldn't be any long burning stars like our sun. So what I realized, just trying to take this in, is that right there in the early universe, the stars were somehow present in the interactions. They were there latently. And so that I'm thinking about this, and this took place, I was at Yosemite. Now, Yosemite is amazing, all these mountains and so forth, but the thing that really captured my fascination in Yosemite here in California were the boulders. These big boulders would come rolling down the mountains. Not that I saw them, but I mean, there they were. And they're like the size of a house. And so I was up there touching one of the boulders and just trying to take in the boulder, just so huge and beautiful. And then I remembered an image of Mars. And the boulders there were very similar. I mean, why wouldn't they be? But nevertheless, as I thought about this, and then now I thought about the other planets in the Milky Way galaxy. They, we estimate now there are 100 billion planets in the Milky Way galaxy. And on many of them, these boulders are being constructed. So what hit me was the boulder is a cosmological event. So just like the early universe knew that it was going, and in some sense, it didn't know consciously, but that the dynamism of the early universe was going to lead to stars. And I just drew the obvious conclusion. It's so obvious, it's almost embarrassing. The dynamism of the early universe was leading to boulders. And so, why was it such a shock to me? Because in a certain sense, I think in that moment I was discovering one of what I now call a defect of modern consciousness, which is the denigration of rocks. So the denigration of boulders. you know, people say, well, he's like he's got the brain of a rock. He's a rock header. So it's all beneath us, beneath us, beneath us. And yet, what I realized, not only were those boulders cosmological events that in a certain sense were already present in potentiality at the birth of the universe, not only that, they gave birth to us. So, and this is the incredible insight of a time developmental universe. Our Earth at one time was molten rock. And then it developed into boulders and plants and humans in a very complex process involving so many other dynamics. But just the fact of that, just taking in the fact of that, altered my relationship with every entity on the planet. Everything, no matter what I was looking at, a cactus, an ant, a mosquito, a cloud, each thing is a cosmological being. And that was one of those moments when I realized this is what Thomas was talking about. This is it, this it's a different way of being. That's what he meant. So there's okay, I just have one more. Here's the other one. It's actually it's the same insight, but from a different angle. So don't be surprised when you think, didn't he just tell us this? Why is he telling us again? Because I kept discovering it all over again. I don't know what to do. So this took place. When Thomas Berry and I were writing the universe story, I was trying so hard to figure out the various thresholds in the evolution of life. So one of the big ones is the movement to multicellularity. So how do we move to multicellularity? It turns out that that's a really difficult transition. There are different theories, and depending on who I was studying, I had a favorite theory. They kept changing because it's not yet obvious how this happened. But nevertheless, there I was working away on these science texts, and I was in the patio in our backyard. I was sitting there, and I just glanced up, and at that time we had a yellow lab named Emily. And you know what the yellow labs are like. They're the sweetest, dogs ever. They're just so sweet. And so Emily was sitting there and looking up at me and wagging her tail. And I just thought, I know Emily's personality. I mean, I can tell her she's different than other labs, even the ones that are close, because her brother lived next door, Blake, and they had very different personalities. We're like humans, anything else. So, but the question came to me: where did Emily's personality come from? And so then I just thought like wow, where did it come from? And then so I just sat there and imagined. I imagined Emily moving back in time. And then we got to the wolf ancestors, and then the reptiles, the amphibians, the fish. I just saw the whole sequence, And then we got to the moment of when multicellular beings came forth, and then even those dissolved. And so then I sat there imagining, with this amazing power we all have, the human imagination. I saw those unicellular beings coming together, and in the synergy of their interactions, following and then leading to further synergies, that process constructed Emily's personality. There wasn't any separation between her consciousness and her physical structure. It was all there together. And this was what Thomas Berry was attempting to get across to me. And this idea of Teilhard's, the phrase of complexity consciousness. And then so as I sat there, I realized that the process hasn't stopped. The process hasn't stopped. And that the way in which we were interacting, we humans interacting, was yet another stage. And so this was a moment when I felt the truth of Teilhard's. Teilhard had this love of the sequence of planet Earth. Planet Earth began as molten rock, then it gave birth to the atmosphere. And then you had molten rock and air giving birth to the hydrosphere. Then we had the rock, solid now, with an atmosphere and a hydrosphere giving birth to life. Now Teilhard's point was that the significance of our moment was that land and air and water and life gave rise to thought, to human thought, which in Teilhard's vision was enveloping the entire planet and penetrating into every aspect of life, what he called the noosphere. And in moments like that, thinking about it, I realized that this experience of realizing that every entity is a cosmological entity, and that we are involved in a magical, mysterious process that leads to deepening consciousness. This then is the way in which the noosphere is appearing, with the promise, and this is again now going to Thomas, with the promise of inaugurating an era of mutually enhancing relationships in the Earth community. Mutually enhancing relationships, replacing the use relationships in which we live now. Mutually enhancing relationships that would bring forth a vibrant new era of the Earth community. So even though I feel like, even though I've only devoted myself to one thing, it's this, my whole life, I feel very much like we're just in the shallows of what Thomas felt was coming and was happening, and made real for all of us who had a chance to be in his presence, and that will now extend to people all around the planet and into the future because of the magnificent work of Mary Evelyn and John. Thank you so much.
Brian, that was wonderful. And lest I forget to mention, there's a great celebration that's taking place at the American Academy of Religion, November 22nd, of a new edition of one of Brian's most wonderful books, The Hidden Heart of the Cosmos. And hopefully at the end of this session, you'll have a flyer, because this is in the series on ecology and justice, which is trying to say cosmology, ecology, and justice are one connected entity. There's books in this series on African Americans, on Native Americans, on water issues, and so on. But cosmology is the basis for this transformative society, mutually enhancing relations that Brian just pointed to. So I wanted to highlight that. There's a beautiful book on the encyclical as well, with this Cry of the Earth, Cry of the Poor. Leonardo Boff's book, deeply influenced by Thomas Berry, is in this series too. Brian, we'd love you to also maybe just reflect on, you came to...
Professor Tucker, is it possible I could actually see you? Maybe we could turn the camera.
Then I think you can't see the rest of the group.
But yeah, but if I'm going to be talking with you, it'd be fun to see your face.
Can we just turn it around? Okay, they're going to do that.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Swimme. Great idea. Okay, there we are. So just Hidden Heart of the Cosmos, new edition, Brian Swime's illustrations in the book. It's magnificent. So it will elaborate what he just said. So we want to maybe just draw you out for a few moments, since we've been celebrating Thomas and Riverdale Center here this morning, and of course his history of religions and so on. But you came to Riverdale after working with Matthew Fox at Mundelein in Chicago. You were able to invite Thomas out there, and it transformed your life. But we want to hear how that transformation took place at Riverdale in particular when you came there, 82, 83. Give us a little feel for your time at Riverdale.
Well, in a kind of a phrase, just try to capture the impact. It was the gatherings that you organized for the American Teilhard Association. So we would meet on the first Saturday of the month, right?
Yes.
And I had been in the world, like John was saying at the beginning, I had been in the world of academic science, and there are lots of things I loved about it, but there were just these questions I wanted to pursue. And I came across the essay, The New Story by Thomas Berry, and there was nothing in comparison in terms of a penetrating vision. It lit me up instantly, but it was just a little book, a little pamphlet I read. But I just had this deep desire to find out more. And then, no one really, I couldn't find anyone that could really carry on the conversation like that and then I show up at Riverdale, right? And then you have these gatherings, and I walked into the room, and everybody in there was talking about this from a different perspective. One person would be heavily involved with Carl Jung, or another person would be expert in Confucian thought or indigenous religions. I just went wild. It was like being. I remember I would drive back home, and I think, well, that's what heaven must be like. Pretty much that. It was just endless, fascinating, amazing conversation. I never had anything that was that intense, nor afterwards did I ever have anything that was intense. I think my whole life has been following through on articulating and investigating the vision that was transmitted. I mean, primarily by Thomas, but by you too, by the others that were engaged with this. It was like this amazing node of the planet, where you walk in there and everything starts to happen, and when you walk out, you're a different person. It was a kind of an intense temple, I remember afterwards, at the end of the year, I didn't want to leave. I said, Thomas, I just want to set up a tent right here, and I'm just going to stay right here. He said, no, you've got to go back out into the world.
Yeah, that's lovely.
Yeah. At the end of that year, Thomas asked you to do what he didn't ask anyone else, and that was to be part of the summer conference. And the two of you gave the conference. Can you just give us a little feeling for that conference at the end of the year?
Well, in a sense, Thomas, he would, so many people have told me that by interacting with Thomas, they found their destiny. And often it was a return to the destiny they knew they had, but they hadn't found a way to really bring it forth, And so when Thomas and I were preparing for that conference, I just knew what my whole life was about. And so I felt that, I know that Mary Evelyn, you and I have talked about, John, you and I have talked about, the same thing has happened with each of us, that it was, he crowned and mitered us over ourselves. He activated our larger destiny. It was just, it was amazing being around him. I remember being at a Broadway diner, just being at Broadway diner, and then I remember. So he was there, and I came and sat down, and when I sat down, he looks up at me and he said, I've been dealing with the Parkway and trying to drive and not create accidents and get there on time, and all these things were in my mind, and I got to remember to leave on time, and I sit down, and he looks up at me and he says, I've been thinking about Western civilization. He just lived at that level. He lived at that high level of reflection and thought. And he instilled in all of us a desire to live at that level. I mean, just to be considering the really important questions and not to be sidetracked. And so as I sat there, one of the big moments of my life, and one of the big moments of my life with Thomas Berry, was when I was sitting there and becoming, I don't know what the word is exactly. It's not exactly mesmerized, but there's a way in which listening to him had the magical effect of deepening one's consciousness. I felt smarter and deeper, just being around him. I felt, wow, I really understand things now for the first time. And then as he was speaking, the thought came to me, I'm having coffee with Pythagoras. He just lived at that high level. And wow. All those stories that I would read about saints, and they just being around them made you feel like a saint.
Brian, can I play with a few words and try to develop a storyline? And I want the story to come to Santa Sabina, where the group gathered to discuss universe story before the book was published. It was a rather significant moment, but I want to go make a little journey to that, okay? And I want to frame a question as we go. You brought us into cosmogenesis, and you also rung a bell about everything that would appear was in those early moments, and the phrase cosmolatency came to my mind, a kind of something latent within the cosmic, and then it manifests itself. And I'm feeling there's a latency that manifested itself at the universe gathering at Santa Sabina. And what was latent is in the new story. There is in the new story a very deep sense of the rage against the human condition, the distancing from the natural world, the industrial technological processes that really have distanced us. And I think Thomas he took that very seriously, and I think he was very discouraged by our whole modern encounter. And I think at Santa Sabina was the first moment where I saw Thomas turn. And something was latent in Thomas's whole engagement with his own thought, which appeared at that moment, and where he would say publicly, you know, I'm not as discouraged as I was before. Overtly, one might say it's because you, the concert of people, are part, something like you said about I felt this communion of people. I felt the group coming together. But there's something else going on there. So I wanted to frame a question to you. You were there. You heard Thomas make that statement. All of us feel the pressure of this world we're living in. What did Thomas feel, or how can we learn at that from Thomas at that moment where he said, I'm encouraged now?
Yeah, that's... Yeah, that well, you know, I think, because I wonder if you'd asked me like 5 minutes ago, when was the turnaround for Thomas from a deep sense of foreboding to a cautious sense of hope? You know, I wonder if I would have come up with Santa Sabina. That's possible, but I would say, here's what I would say. Thomas, being a visionary, he saw ahead. He really did. And he couldn't find an echo in our culture for what he saw, for the most part, right? 99.9% of our culture wasn't taking in what he was saying. And there's a loneliness that he was left with, right? And yet, like you say, there was some latency in the New Story essay that was brought forth in the gatherings. What was the gathering? We had psychologists, we had philosophers, we had physicists, you know, we had community organizers, and they all came together deeply moved by the vision Thomas was talking about. So I think that's how I understood it, is that, you know, deep in his soul, he was realizing he was transmitting and being received. That's what I think was happening. And it brought him a sense of energy.
And brought that energy to us, Brian, too.
Say it again.
You've brought that energy to us, too, and I'm getting signals from the organizers that we have to draw it to a close. But I feel the energies you've brought to us.
Thanks. It's so good to be here with you.
Wait, do you have any final comments? Because frankly, this is a very special moment. I know we have a panel. We're going to hear other people. But you might not be able to hear Brian again by Skype because he doesn't travel. So I think this is a very special moment, and we're so grateful that thanks to the technology. But how about one final comment, Brian?
Okay, yeah, let me one final comment. Again, this is about the multiple dimensionality of Thomas Berry. So I was trying so hard to learn this new story and it changed the world, and then I came across this idea that I knew he would love. That we're going to transform all of our society if we can just get the difference between cost and price. And so I was reading these economists, and they're saying, look, the problem with our whole society is that the price of an item in a store isn't the cost to the ecological system. We just got to bring them together, and then we'll have it. And so I went charging into the Broadway diner, sat down, talking. Thomas, we're going to solve the problem, price, cost, and so forth. And he just waited and waited until I was done. And then right then, the waitress refilled his coffee cup, and then he smiled at her, and she smiled at him, and she turned and walked away. And Thomas said, he said, you're thinking in terms of money and economy, and that's fine, but that's not enough. That act that we just saw, that act from the waitress, is an infinite act, so far beyond any economic analysis. Then I realized, wow, I've got a long ways to go. Great to be here.
Thank you so much, Brian. Thank you.